extraordinary meeting of the 169th session of the Queen's University of Belfast Literary and Scientific Society. It is my great pleasure to welcome you back this evening to the Senate Room. It has been much too long. So, as you're all well aware, on the agenda tonight is a most thrilling motion. This House would negotiate with terrorists. I cannot wait personally for it to start, as I expect it will be one of our most intriguing motions to see how these fine speakers handle it. So, to kick things off this evening, and I've been meaning to get into the habit of saying that I do gavel this meeting to order, because I have been adjourning at the end, so may as well do the opening. Announcements. So, I have written these in a very peculiar order. So, let's go with, first of all, most of you have an order paper in front of you, as you may have noticed. Is Mr Nairn here this evening? I don't see him.
He's at the Players Society.
Shame. Well, as you may notice on the reverse side of the page, courtesy of Mr Nairn, we have a bingo card. So yes, I thought I should add that because I thought it was funny. So, due credit to him, next time he's here or if he arrives late, we'll give him a spontaneous applause and really confuse him. But yes, they're all the same on all of them. So it's more like how much attention can you pay this game luck thing. So yes, do enjoy that. And there are no prizes decided as of yet, but maybe we'll come up with something. Other announcements, just a quick thing. That I should have said weeks ago, to be honest. The next item after announcements, as most of you know, is the reading of the minutes. The minutes have to be passed unanimously. So if anybody notices anything that's wrong, of like some basic substance, if it's like a little thing, like the meeting number is incorrect, we'll catch that.
Or the name of one of the speakers.
Yes, if the name of one of the speakers is wrong, whenever we call for the vote, say nay, and if we hear even one, then Peter has to take your criticism and deal with it.
No pressure.
So yes, indeed. Otherwise, I shall kick things over to the council members. So, first of all, our social officer, Mr Conor O'Neill, where art thou? Would you like to tell the fine people of the House about the pub crawl next Monday? Or, yes.
Yeah, so pub crawl next Monday. It's going to be starting at about 6:30, Mr Roddy.
Yes.
6:30, so 6:30 at the Student Union steps. It's going to be £5 for normal members and £7 for non-members. We'll basically start walking in the town, go to a couple of pubs and then finish in like a club sort of venue. It's a bit of a mystery and it's also fancy dress, and it'll be a great way for you to get to meet people and socialise in the society, and I would recommend you go. Sign ups tonight, basically any time after people spoke.
Yes, and I believe, what are we doing for the very end of it?
But in City Centre Club, basically.
Yeah, okay, and also, I've just spontaneously thought of this, it may not happen, but we may do a prize for the best costume at the debate afterwards. Maybe that seems like a good idea. So yes, I really encourage you to get yourself out. Our outreach officer, Miss Lauren Carberry O'Neill, is going to say a few things about our charity work. It's okay.
So obviously we're big enough society to be contributing to charities this year, and I'm going to, this time of the year, because there's so much going on, schools competitions, and we've got a pub crawl next week, and everybody else is up there, and I'm not going by my way to organise specific events this time of the year. That'll be in the new year. So what I'm going to do is, in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to have a hamper organised and a raffle, and they're going to be at every debate, probably maybe 2 to 3 weeks. They're going to be at every debate running up until our Christmas dinner, which I hope to see loads of people at, and then it'll all be given away and raffled off at the Christmas dinner, and all going to charity of our choice.
Thank you, Mr. Nairn. Mr Dobbin, could you please say a few words with the Irish Times?
Oh yeah.
On your feet, Mr Dobbin.
There's one for the bingo. So, the Irish Times will be happening on the 10th of November 2017, but excitingly this year, hosted at Queen's. So, if you want to go to that, then it won't even take you travel, won't cost you any of that. So, we'll be having 2 teams for that, I believe. So, if anyone's interested about that, please come and approach me. Won't even take much of your time, 3 hours, the chance to get to the final of the competition where you can win a 3-week all-expense-paid trip to the United States. Final prize for the competition. So, if that at all interests you, then please come and approach me after the debate tomorrow or any other time when I'm free, which is always.
Thank you, Mr. Dobbin. It's worth noting that the Irish Times is arguably the most prestigious debating competition on this island. Off the top of your head, can you name any notable former winners? Because I certainly... Mr. Former Secretary, Mr. Whitehurst, would you like to do the honours? To yourself, notable former winners.
Irish comedian Dara O'Brien.
Ooh. Next up, Mr. Bryson. Pardon?
Jerry Carroll.
Jerry Carroll. Sorry.
Emma McCann.
Emma McCann. Mr. Bryson, where art thou? Mr. Bryson, could you say a few words?
So I'm the internal convener, which means I do speakers and debates. So there's 3 spaces on almost every debate coming up. Not every side, but there's one either propositional, obviously, or both. Including the Godkin debate, which is a debate purely for first-year debaters, so someone who's only speaking in this academic year. So if you haven't spoken at all, don't be afraid. Matthew Bradley, the winner last year, it was his first debate in front of the society, and he won. So don't be afraid to speak at that. The spreadsheet for next semester's motions is going up next week on the Literific. And the internal meeting where we discuss what debates we'll be having next semester is happening the first week of December, so I'd love to see all of you there. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Bryson. That motion spreadsheet for next semester is particularly important. Anyone can add as many motions as they like to that, and that's where we draw them from whenever we're discussing the term card for next semester. Otherwise, never mind that. Quick reminder of the rules, just to refresh you. The speaker 7 minutes. Yes, I'll come here in a second. The first and last minute are protected. So at the end of the first minute, I bang the gavel, and then you can ask questions. And when you hear me bang it again at the end, that's when you count. No barracking. So basically, if somebody from the floor asks a question, if they reject it, then give them a few more seconds to get through a couple of lines. If they accept it, you have to let them answer and then get through a few more lines before you ask them questions. And if you break any of these rules, we'll probably either shout "no barking" at you or something like that, which is good fun. Otherwise, I believe... Oh, just one quick thing, Mr O'Neill, to where will we be retiring this evening after the debate?
Up for debate.
We'll sort that out during the debate.
Yeah, you will be informed of that before the end.
A mystery location.
So, that concludes announcements, I do believe. Oh, apart from Miss Lily, that here's announcements.
If anyone wants to come, I'm going to run it's kind of like a casual training session on Tuesday at 1. It's going to be more like, it's not actually going to be real training, it's going to be like, I'll set a debate motion, we'll have some mini debates, I'll give you some like information about it, and we'll just do kind of like practice for anyone who's not really sure. And like, even if you don't want to come and actually debate, you can sit and watch, and like that's perfectly fine. I'll put like the event up and everything, but yeah, Tuesday at 1 if you guys want to come, that'd be great. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Dobbin. And now, to read the minutes of the 4th Ordinary Meeting, this House will enforce equal marriage on NI, I do hereby invite the Honourable Secretary, Mr. Peter Dunn.
The 4th Ordinary Meeting of the Literary and Scientific Society took place on the 19th of October and was attended by 70 members. After a quick welcome from President Black, it was straight into what was promised to be a brief session of private members' business. Our Treasurer, Mr John MacDonald, asked the House whether Trump's comments saying that he wasn't surprised following the recent allegations made against Mr Harvey Weinstein, showing that indeed we have instituted problems. Mr Fionnbharr Rodgers, Honorary Life Member, replied by remarking that we have instituted problems by the fact that Trump is indeed the President of the United States. Mr Matthew Sullivan then asked that the following remarks made by the government of Spain threatening the autonomy of Catalonia, whether this was fair and just considering that overwhelming a majority who voted for independence and the referendum. And just to be clear, this is a quote. Miss Ima Huertas responded short and sweetly by saying that the President of Spain was an arsehole. Mr Liam Mackle then asked the House if he believed MLA's pay should be cut considering the stalemate of Stormont. Mr Jude Perry was very much against cutting MLA's pay, as he claimed it undermined their constituency work, and thus without it their offices wouldn't be able to operate. Ms Sarah Gallant also commented that MLAs deserves much more respect than they usually get by the public, and I think it's fair to say the House Thus finished private members' business, which is no shorter than it ever is. The President's questions was then begun with a drastic turn of events. The President was asked what he had for breakfast, but for this time, by Mr Edmund Upton. The President claimed that he had cranberry juice and shreddies with soy milk for breakfast. However, the consistency and the level of the boring breakfast that he's had is suggestion of only one thing: a lie. My team are currently working to find out what the true President's breakfast is. Next. Ms Campbell then asked the President what his favourite colour was. After a quite frankly unnecessarily long explanation, the President didn't say orange, apparently because of some weird, political connotations. But he said grey, which is apparently the colour of his morality. The President then introduced the motion that this House would enforce equal marriage on an eye, and took a vote on prior opinion, which read 38 in favour, 15 against, and 6 abstentions. Kicking off the evening's debate was maiden speaker Mr Scott Moore, who started off the evening passionately. He began by defining what equal marriage would mean in Northern Ireland, and particularly what the proposition meant by this House would enforce. He argued that the current laws in Northern Ireland were a violation of basic human rights, which was entrenched in the Good Friday Agreement, and thus it should override waiting for the Northern Ireland Assembly to make a decision, as they may be waiting a while. First speaker for the opposition was Mr Clean Thornton. He spoke from the heart, explaining how the subject of this motion personally affected him. He vowed to the gay gods to get in touch with RRL, but argued that getting a government back up and running was much more important than immediately implementing the legislation. Second speaker for the proposition was maiden speaker, Miss Bethany Ashley. As an English student, she got down to the nitty-gritty semantics of the term in force. She then proceeded to assure the House that this was clearly a matter of equality, citing that nobody had ever dreamed of a fairy tale-esque civil partnership. Second speaker for the opposition was Miss Ciaran Campbell. She assured the rest of the House that her side were in no way against equal marriage, but such a change has to be decided by the people of Northern Ireland and not enforced on its population. She argued it would undermine the peace process and democracy. Third speaker of the proposition was Mr Hugh Perry. He argued enforcing equal marriage in Northern Ireland would send a message to, quote, and this is a quote, those inward people who are currently against equal marriage. He suggests the involvement of the Irish government and commented that due to the makeup of the political landscape of Northern Ireland, he couldn't see the legislation being passed through democratic means. Third speaker for the opposition, and also our third maiden speaker for the evening, was Mr Kinsale. He argued that respect of religious belief, which he argued was at the core of the current laws in Northern Ireland, should be taken into account. He reinforced that democracy should be at the heart of all decisions, and therefore had a problem with enforcing legislation in Northern Ireland. Fourth speaker for the proposition was Miss Fionnbharr Rodgers. She started the debate in a seemingly, let's say, interesting manner. She asked the House whether they like vegetables or not. This, of course, was to point out what she argued was the discrimination people felt in Northern Ireland because of their particular sexual orientation. She argued that Spain, despite its religious tensions, had managed to pass equal marriage 10 years, and Northern Ireland should quite frankly hurry up, and thus build a bright and positive future for the LGBT+ community in Northern Ireland. Our final speaker of the evening, and thus closing the debate, was Mr Morgan Hickman. He said under no circumstances should equal marriage be prioritised over the peace process. He argued that marriage was merely a label, citing his own parents were not married. Mr Hickman closed the argument by saying that due to the fragility of the situation that we have in Northern Ireland, democracy had to be at the heart of all decisions made by the people. Questions were then heard from Mr Hugh Dobbin, Mr Will Hancock Evans, Mr Jacques Snow, Mr Fionnbharr Rodgers and Mr Russell Mann. The casting vote read 13 votes for the proposition, 18 for the opposition and 25 abstentions. May I take a minute to read?
Nay. Nay. Mr Rodgers, you object?
Yes, actually, because as you said, questions from the floor were heard from
Give me a question.
myself. Technically you're right, but I was speaking on behalf of Mr Fionnbharr.
Okay.
That's right.
That can certainly go into the minutes.
Everyone else, all those in favour?
Nay.
Oh,
point that your minutes were very enjoyable and they were pleasant on my ears. However, for the love of God, man, where is your tie?
Here, here.
As you no longer as you no longer have to wear ties in the House of Parliament, I thought I'd do the gown, no tie, semi-casual.
We are not
Still
the
looking
Parliament.
good.
We have standards.
Exactly.
So that's alright. It's
Anyway.
a deliberate.
Can we now pass the motion? Aye. Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Peter Dunn, for that, as ever, wonderful presentation of the minutes. Before we move on to private members' business, I would just like to quickly point something out. I apologise, Mr. Rodgers. On the board delivery, you may notice that Mr. Rodgers and Mr. Gallagher are referred to as honorary life members. I was asked a question at the start of the debate just last week about what exactly an honorary life member is and what you have to do to become one. And I just thought I might as well reiterate. Indeed, yes. But just so, basically an honorary life member is a person who has been bestowed an honorary life membership by the House, generally at the annual general meeting of the Society, and it is for service to the Society above and beyond what would normally be expected of a member. They get a nice little black and gold plastic card, and just, I think it says, it sums it up quite nicely. On the back it says, this card presented to member name by President, whichever President, on behalf of the whichever session of the Queen's University of Belfast Literary and Scientific Society, signifies honorary life membership to the Literific. For your dedication and repeated service, we offer you our thanks and gratitude, and there will always be a place for you among our number.
Cheers, love.
You're welcome, you're very welcome, Mr. Rodgers. So that's what an honorary life member is, just for those who are curious. Now, on to private members' business. I believe, did you say you won this week or not? You did?
Yeah.
I will come to that later then. First of all, I will go for Mr. Doherty first, because I know what he's going to ask.
Okay. Could the House please join me in wishing our social officer, a man who I have been lucky enough to speak with, a very happy birthday, Mr Conor O'Neill.
I would second that motion, but only on the provision that we actually get to sing him happy birthday. Quick vote, all those in favour say aye! Aye! Excellent, I believe by vote of acclamation that is passed. So, a 1, a 2, 3, 4. Happy birthday to you! Happy birthday to you! Happy birthday, dear Con! Happy birthday to you! Excellent, Mr. Doherty. I very much appreciate that. Are there any other items of private members' business? Yes, Mr. MacDonald, our treasurer.
I was actually quite disappointed by that. I wanted to wish someone who was a little bit more important to society a really happy birthday. Someone that's a real beacon, stands for our values, and that's one Hillary Rodham Clinton. So would the House please join me?
Can I get a seconder for that?
No.
All those in favour, raise your hand and say aye. All those against, say nay. All those abstaining, say nay. The motion is defeated, I'm afraid, Mr. MacDonald. I'm terribly sorry. I believe Mr. Moore has a piece of private members' business.
Yes, on 2 occasions in recent months, being whenever Belfast Pride was on, and another more recently at the Rally for Choice. Basically, protesters have been carrying signs, I'm going to self-censor, stating F the DUP.
That is appreciated.
Yeah, and as a result, basically, there's been police action taken against them, even though whenever similar signs were shown at London Pride, the Metropolitan Police took no action. Now, I personally believe that this is a waste of police time and resources, and the police are being used in a political manner to basically intimidate people out of exercising their free speech. And most of all, I believe that the oppressed people have the right to say, F my oppressor, right? So I would like to ask if the House will basically give their sympathies and support to those who are under this threat, and condemn any effort to abuse the police to protect oppressors in these situations.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Does anyone have any thoughts on that particular motion? Mr. Hickman?
All due respect to honourable member, but unfortunately the Metropolitan Police aren't subject to the rulings of the Parades Commission, which is just a body that exists here. For reasons still surpass understanding from an Englishman like myself.
Thank you, Mr. Hickman. Anybody else like to comment? Mr. Glasgow?
I think that the legislation that actually governs public order offences in England and Wales is different than in Northern Ireland, and unfortunately, like, the police, when a complaint like this is made, have to act because there's a provision in our legislation which says that words that are directed towards someone that may be construed as insulting can constitute a public order offence. So I think what really needs to happen is a deeper look at the legislation, although obviously Stormont can't do that at the minute. So.
I believe Mr. Gallagher would like to rebut.
This isn't against someone, this is against a party. If you are not willing to stand up to the F word, you really shouldn't stand to be the leading party in a country, I don't care which country it is. Secondly, the woman in question, her name is Ellie Evans, she's a student at this university. She's an English woman as well. She has no gripe when it comes to nationalism or unionism, has no race in that horse. She basically just objects to the use of the petition of concern to block a democratic and highly popular vote when it comes to equal marriage. I think the way certain members of the UB have acted in this is utterly shameful, and I think the suspension of civility in this case shows them what we think of them is quite justified.
Here, here.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. I will take one final point on this. I'd rather not be any
I'll speak.
Ms. Bellavas.
I completely agree with what Ciaran said. Coming from a state and a country that really prides itself on free speech, I think it's important for being able to.
Ms. Bellavas, please continue.
I think it's really important, and I also agree with Scott that I think it's important to denounce your oppressor, because one of my favorite quotes by Aubrey Lord says, if you do not stand up to your oppressor, if you do not speak out, basically people will say that you enjoyed being oppressed, so I think it's really important to be able to speak out.
Thank you, Ms. Bellavas. I believe there was a motion in there somewhere, so I shall now move the House to a vote. All those in favour of the motion that this House would extend sympathies to those affected by the police action, or the police response to this incident of the sign.
Specifically, Evans.
Specifically, yeah, do you want to, it was your motion, so would you like to be?
You want me to give you a wording?
Yeah, sure.
This House believes in the right of the oppressed to say F my oppressor.
Okay, well that's the motion. Can I get a second there? Second. Mr. Crosby, all those in favour of that motion, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Keep them up. Just 2, 4, 6, 14, 16,
That's
30. All those against, please raise your hand and say nay. There's no one opposes that motion. All those who wish to abstain, please raise your hand and say meh. Keep them up. 4, 6, I'm going to say 20. Yes. Okay, the motion is passed. I shall now move us on. One final item then of private matter.
No, it was the President's question.
I shall now move us on to President's questions. Does anybody have a question for me? President Emeritus Murphy.
Given that opinions that can be attributed to Calvin Blackburn about his comment has devolved executives, I guess I thought I'd try and get your opinion on something, anything. What have you listened to in the last week that you enjoyed musically?
Many men have tried, Mr. Murphy. Many have failed. But on this occasion, I will indulge you. There is a sadly not well enough known band I'm not going to go into why I put quotation marks around that. From Northern Ireland, called The Divine Comedy. Anyone? Anyone?
Yeah.
Yeah. They're yes, they did the Team Future Private Ted. My Lovely Horse, wasn't that, or is that?
No,
They did My Lovely Horse. Oh yes, that's right. They did do My Lovely Horse. Anyway, yes, I would like the House to know that Neil Hannon is basically the only person consistently involved with the band. He's the front runner, the singer, the songwriter, and all that. He's from Northern Ireland. I believe he's from Enniskillen.
In north of Ireland.
There's no such thing as the North of Ireland. But yes, he sadly enough, very rarely performs in Northern Ireland, and he is in fact on a tour during this autumn and winter months, and he's performing in the Ulster Hall down in City Centre. But do you know when he's performing? On a Thursday at 7 p.m. Do you know what, my good friends, comrades and colleagues, as much as I do love him and as much as he very rarely performs in this fine country, I shall be here that evening. So I know where my loyalty lies. But yes, I will be weeping on the inside, I assure you. Any other President's questions? Secretary Emeritus, and Honourable Member, Mr Robert Whitehurst.
As someone who's been away and hasn't had a chance to listen to every moment of every debate, what has been the highlight of your year so far? Your literific year so far, I should say.
Too many to name, Mr Whitehurst. They come thick and fast. I think there is one that stands out above all others, and it is quite clear getting to know all these lovely people seated before us.
Politician.
How's the EGM?
Yes, yeah. Close second was the EGM. One final question. Mr Sullivan, you haven't spoken yet.
What makes man term neutral? Is lust for gold, power, or were you simply born with a heart full of neutrality?
All I will say to that foul and vile accusation, Mr Sullivan, is that if anything is to befall me this evening, and I should be incapacitated or, heaven forbid, killed, I would simply like someone to convey a message to my wife, and that message is hello. To vote on prior opinion. I see they're really tickled Mr Crosby there. So yes, this is a vote on prior opinion. So this is, if we were the House of Parliament, and by the way, I've already forgotten, Mr Dobbin said it with that tie thing. We are supreme and superior to the House of Parliament, how you know. We are the sovereign national governing body of every last country on this planet. They just don't know it yet. Yes. So yes. If we were in the House of Parliament, this vote were before us, this is how you would vote right now. So, all those who would like to vote in favour of the motion that this House would negotiate with terrorists, please raise your hand and say aye! Aye. Keep them up. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I have 14, Mr Secretary.
I have 16.
Let's go with 16. 16. All those who would oppose the motion, please raise your hand and say nay! Nay. Keep them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, Mr Secretary. And all those who have no opinion on the motion, who wish to abstain, please raise your hand and say meh! Meh! Keep it up. 25, Mr Secretary. Excellent. So I believe the abstentions won that vote on our opinion. So congratulations to them. Order. We're nearly there. So this is an even more special occasion than has been previously discussed, because on this fine evening we have joining us a special guest chair. As I desperately attempt. Oh, I apologise, Mr Rodgers. I forgot your piece of private member's business. We'll do it next week.
Yeah.
Yes. So our guest chair this evening is, yes, quite right, is Mr. William Graham former political correspondent, some say editor, no one really knows for sure, of the Irish News. He's also, and I can't get the message on time, so let's see if I remember this. He's also a current member of the Arts and Wonder Collective, a committee in Rostrevor that exists for the purpose of facilitating dialogue between those of the Abrahamic faiths. Thank you, Mr. Rodgers. I regret to you for that. Apologies. Mr. Guest Chair, for not remembering that off the top of my head. I do very much apologise. I would now like to welcome our guest chair to give an introductory address. Give him a hand.
Used to this. Anyway, my name's William Graham, and it's a great privilege to be here in these hallowed halls. Of course, I failed my 11 plus, not once but twice, right? So I never made it to university. Although I have knocked around here quite a bit at conferences and dialogue much with Senator George Mitchell, who chaired the Good Friday talks, and I was privileged enough to be one of the, I think only one of two journalists mentioned with his well-known book Making Peace in Northern Ireland. So I come from the Sticks, the Boondock, Machara, County Derry, and so I started in journalism in 1968 and worked first as a hard news reporter. And then became a political correspondent, started writing about politics. Newspapers I worked for, I was political correspondent for the Belfast Telegraph, and later the Irish News for about 29 years, and was also correspondent for the London Times and special correspondent for the Los Angeles Times in Ireland. So I've retired about 6 years now. I still write a little, but mostly concentrate on community voluntary work. As I say, it has been a very interesting journey. I've lived through bad times and good times. The bad times including going as a hard news reporter to the doors of people whose members of their family had been murdered the night before or blown up. And was in the bomb explosion myself whenever I worked in Belfast Telegraph. But we travelled along a roadway, along a pathway, and we got into talks, and long years of talking, and finally getting into talks. I think myself and other journalists having to stand outside castle buildings at Stromond and other places thought would definitely get arthritis out of this, because it's night after night after night. But nevertheless, we survived. Mitchell was key to putting together the whole package. And so, as a guy from Machara, I ended up meeting presidents, Taoiseach's Prime Minister, talking to Clinton, Charles Hockey, George Fitzgerald, Tony Blair, Margaret Thatcher, whenever she was in opposition. And so an interesting pair of people, and two of the most impressive people that I've met in my life on this journey has been Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who chaired the South African Commission, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, whom I've had the privilege to meet 5 times now, and an interview once, and strange that somebody from Northern Ireland should meet the Dalai 5 times, and with people in Tibet happen to be able to meet. But a wonderful figure, and certainly was very helpful behind the scenes in the peace process, as was Desmond Tutu, who said to me afterwards, I asked him about a truth and reconciliation, and he said, It really you should have had it much sooner because you wait too long, so it's a very difficult subject to get into. Anyway, involved more in community work now as Fionnbharr and others were saying, involved Arts Wonder Collective, Mr Forever, which brings together Christians, Muslims and Jewish people. We talk about a higher level of disagreement. I don't know what that means. But it's I think to promote dialogue, and we have Jewish meals, we have Islamic meals, Christian meals, we sit around at the table, and of course we know that if a person hates another person, if they sit down and eat, if they share a plate of bread together, it's more difficult for them to hate each other. So that's a kind of group that I'm involved in at the moment. I think it'll be an interesting debate tonight. It's a very prickly subject, if I may say. But I would just encourage you to think of an Islamic concept, insight, which means empathy. And empathy, of course, means walking in someone else's shoes. So I don't mind if you get angry in the debate, but if you get really, really angry, well, I might say, take a deep breath and smile outside. So let's have it. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Graham. Just before we begin, has anybody seen the gavel? Not at all, no.
Mr. Rodgers!
Oh!
There it is! Please pass it down. Very much. As such, I would now like to welcome the first speaker for the proposition, Honorary Elect Member, Mr Fionnbharr Rodgers.
Uncomfortable to hold in my pocket. Ladies, gentlemen, and all those who subscribe to none of the above, it falls upon me to define the motion, which I shall do in two halves, compartmentalising and basically doing everything that psychologists advise against. Mr Moore, after that, will bring in some specific examples. Mr Gallagher will talk about how terrorists is not a monolithic entity, but a diverse and complex concept. And then Mr Crosby will wrap up, put us all to bed and read us a story. The opposition might also say things. Firstly, terrorist is not a particularly useful term because state governments, individuals, groups of all different shapes, sizes and abilities will involve themselves with terror tactics. And there will always be a debate over who is a terrorist and who is not, as we've seen recently with the Las Vegas shootings. And similarly, our definition of who is a terrorist and who is not generally blows in the wind of public opinion. And we can always, or usually, justify the actions of those we agree with. Secondly, the motion is far more sensible than the opposition might lead you to believe. It's not just that the general ramblings of a bleeding heart liberal, but negotiating does not mean agreeing with outright. Negotiation, as it is pronounced in the original Welsh, is not the signing of a blank cheque for the aims of the other side, and this is evidenced perhaps best by the fact we do not currently, 19 years after the Good Friday Agreement, live in a 32 county republic, probably perhaps to our shame. Armed groups usually contain not only a mixed bag, which will have many moderates that can be brought in from the code and bring in others from the code. And also they can be talked down from their original position. Most governments are unlikely to agree to the establishment of a global caliphate, apart from maybe the exception of the Lord Mayor of Birmingham, if you watch Fox News. But there is probably some middle ground that can be struck. Former Labour leader Hugh said all terrorists at the invitation of the government end up having drinks in the Dorchester. And it's true that the pretense of we don't negotiate with terrorists and we will starve the men of violence of the oxygen that they crave is always adhered to at the very start by politicians who wish to appear strong and stable, trademark. And this is evidenced by the fact that, but that is never followed through with to the very end. This is evidenced by the fact that both the Prime Minister and President that I quoted there themselves negotiated with armed groups, whether the Provos or the Contras or whoever else. And indeed, governments suffer from a terrible amnesia in this regard, because when it comes to negotiating. Since 1919, when David Lloyd George said in Cabinet that the IRA were a murder gang and he would never sit down with them, 1 year later he was looking for a back channel to Michael Collins, and they actually ended up getting on quite well. It's a bit of a side fact. And over a century later, all the years in between, we have seen time and time again governments say we will not negotiate with these murderers, we are far above them, and it's usually because we are stronger than them and we believe we can wipe them off the face of the earth. However, it never pans out that way. The same cycle is played out many times, many places, and in many different ways.
On that point,
I'll go away.
so the point there of it never works out that way. How do you contend then with the recent news that ISIS has been decisively military defeated without negotiation being required?
Yes, but they're still there. As a cabinet at the start of the Good Friday Agreement negotiations, the IRA was integrated on every single level. However, they were still very much present. And there's, to an extent, never how close you are to winning. There's never a direct path when it comes to military strategy. And so, with the view of concluding, it's obvious that we'll never find a miracle cure for terrorism. As just as ISIS came after however many different groups in the same region, so many more will arise after their final defeat or dissolution. And we will never find a miracle cure for terrorism, and even if we did, it would probably be in contravention of some human rights law to administer it. And so, lacking that cure, we should stick to the best formula we have at hand, which currently is fighting and talking. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome Mr Conor MacNamara to the opposition.
Welcome everyone, welcome our esteemed chair, members of the House, and Charles. We'll hopefully be in contentious and engaged in debate. First, I just want to clear the air on some misconceptions that will inevitably crop up during this and set up some important contextual facts for us. It's crucial that whilst we're debating this, we don't become bogged down in case studies or moral arguments. This is simply a debate on the costs and benefits of negotiating with terrorists. Now, we still haven't quite settled on definition yet. I'm just going to take the middle road here and settle on the Oxford definition of terrorism. Terrorists, in a sense, are simply defined as non-state actors who use unlawful violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. State actors, by this definition, cannot be considered terrorists. The very conception of the state incorporates a monopoly on force. Now, this monopoly may be applied immorally, but the distinction here is on illegality, not immorality. Non-state actors, lacking electoral or pluralistic legitimacy, are differentiated from states as terrorists. Our first reason now, to get on this criteria that I've worked out, for the following... Yes, sir.
So I've got it based on your... Based on your definition, you say non-state state actors cannot by definition be terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
So, speaking retroactively, if the terrorist force becomes the state, as happened in the Irish Republic, and a number of examples throughout the 19th, 20th and 21st centuries, do their actions retroactively cease to be terrorist actions?
It's a good point. No, they don't. Whilst a non-state actor, they are terrorists. Now, retroactively, you can come up with all sorts of historical narratives to justify those actions. But the black and white situation is here, is that we have a state and we have a non-state actor that lacks any sort of electoral legitimacy or pluralistic legitimacy. A state can be a war crime, it can commit war crimes, but terrorist actions are reserved specifically for non-state actors. Now, just to get on to my first reason, the folly of negotiation. No amount of concessions will pacify hostile behaviour. Any revolutionary or terrorist actor harbours an ideology, nationalist, religious, it doesn't matter, which seeks the upheaval of the existing political order, which precludes negotiation. Seeking to satisfy these actors is impossible for any state whose position is predicated upon that existing order. What a state can do, however, is leave the door open for that terrorist element to negotiate with us from a position of weakness that compels them to abandon their initial aims of upheaval and accept, at best, a realignment of the existing order. If we, as the proposition are arguing, initiate negotiation with terrorists whilst they are still in a position of strength, and this ties into a bit what Mr Rodgers was saying about how do we determine when a terrorist is beaten, surely we should negotiate. No, if we negotiate with them, we open negotiations while they're still in a position of strength. All we've done is weaken further prospects of and negotiations by elevating them to an ever stronger position, inviting further aggression. Secondly, the reality of the international system is that democratically elected governments, and this ties partially into the distinction here between a state and a non-state actor, democratically elected governments have a greater moral authority than terrorist actors, and should not squander that virtue. Negotiation, especially negotiation initiated by the state, only serves to legitimize and validate those actors by treating them as equals. This ties into the dimensions of our present-day politics, into an element that has become the linchpin of the aspirations of terrorist groups, publicity and recognition. Now, by negotiating with terrorist actors, you confer upon them the benefit of recognition and a public spotlight for their message. Now, the importance, this may seem like a bit of a tangent, the importance of publicity and recognition here can't be understated. We see its importance in the influence of Irish-American sympathies driving US sentiment during the Troubles negotiations. We see its effects in the recruitment capacity of ISIS's media-tailored online execution videos. Publicity, especially publicity through negotiation, raises an actor's status and grants them a soapbox for their message. And this is precisely what you conceded by engaging them in negotiation, rather than forcing them to negotiate with you from a position of weakness. Thirdly is a crucial element here, the element of trust, or the lack thereof. The inability to guarantee the intentions or good faith of a terrorist actor, especially when they have been approached with talks from a position of strength, rather than opening dialogue themselves with us from a position of weakness, results in an asymmetry of compliance.
On that point?
No, sir. The terrorists stand only to gain from negotiation, and are empowered to collapse these talks at any time and return to fighting with nothing lost. We, on the other hand, are shouldered with the impetus of maintaining these talks and stand all of the costs of their potential failure: loss of morale, loss of international standing, loss of authority. Finally, the fact of the matter is that pragmatism discourages negotiation with terrorists, particularly of the type that the proposition are advocating. Negotiations are based upon the premise, clarification, and compromise. This is pointless when dealing with a terrorist actor whose aims and motivations are diametrically opposed to ours. Your case studies here are, yes sir.
But you said their aims will be diametrically opposed to ours, but let's take Northern Ireland. There was negotiation with terrorists, a compromise was reached, and now we have relative peace.
Yes, see, this will be what we'll see throughout the debate, is the constant rattling of the Northern Ireland case study. Northern Ireland is a bit of an outside example here, because keep in mind, as I think was highlighted earlier on, their negotiation only take place once the IRA were militarily compromised. They were negotiating from a position of weakness. My point here, especially on being diametrically opposed to terrorist element, is what we think of modern day. You think of ISIS, you think of Al-Qaeda. You may negotiate with them, but it doesn't produce anything upon which any agreements can be made. It is only when force is applied, and when force terrorists into a position of weakness and resulting negotiation with us, rather than us negotiating with them, that we produce the conditions from which a tangible agreement can be established. The proposition's arguments merely empower, embolden, and encourage that terrorist actor to keep up the fight, and leave us discredited and in a weaker position than we were before. It is for this reason that we must vote out this motion. Thank you.
Now we have Mr Scott Moore for the proposition.
Mr President, honoured guests, thank you for having me again. I recognise two types of terrorism. One, which originates from a lone wolf, or a group too small to constitute any mandate in society, and more broadly based movements, which generally seek to contest the legitimacy of the state and its actions. I believe in the use of violence for purposes of self-defence. If there was a way for revolution to happen in Nazi Germany, or Stalinist Russia, or Maoist China, but only through violence, such violence would be justified. Using that violence could very well save lives in the long run. However, it should not be taken lightly. Not all instances of state-sponsored oppression is equal to what, say, Hitler may preside over. You don't resort to violence until you've exhausted all peaceful and democratic means, and you're certain that you will be saving lives. In the case of Nazi Germany, there's consensus that threshold was reached. In other instances, consensus does not exist. The most obvious place where the necessity of violence is in dispute is right here, Northern Ireland. From 1921 until 1972, a majoritarian unionist regime in the partition north, dominated by upper-class Anglicans, stripped a large nationalist minority of its civil rights and segregated Protestants and Catholics to protect and entrench their socially privileged position. A civil rights movement inspired by that of black people in America emerged. Clashes with police happened, these became riots, the army was called in, internment was introduced, the parachute regiment killed 13 peaceful protesters in Derry. Amidst it all, paramilitaries such as the Provisional IRA, UDA and UVF were formed. By the late 80s, both sides were disillusioned with conflict and became open to negotiations. Back channels were opened. In 1994, paramilitaries called a ceasefire. The British and Irish governments arranged elections to a negotiation forum. The political wings of the IRA, UDA and UVF won over a fifth of votes. Sinn Féin represented nearly 1 in 6. Life here isn't perfect, but it is a lot better than it was before the ceasefire and the Good Friday Agreement. On average, 117 people died each year because of the Troubles. Since 2002, 4 people per year have been killed by paramilitaries. If we had not signed the agreement, how many more people who are here today may not be? Would we have waited 30 more years? As well as protecting life, it has uplifted the quality of life. No checkpoints at the border. Business is confident to invest in our society and our people. Tourists and visitors able to come and see. Yes?
Are we discussing Northern Ireland as a case study to terrorist negotiations, or are we generalising this and having a motion to vote?
I'm going to come on to that. Tourists and visitors able to come and see our beautiful environment and our rich shared culture without fearing conflict, and a society where, no matter where your allegiance lies, we get the main say in steering the ship. There are few more vocally critical people of our politics than I, but I value our right to determine how we organise this society and to decide our constitutional fate. However, dysfunctional politics may be here. If you ask me, it's a hell of a lot better than being subject to the whim of MPs in the South England who have never set foot here. Indeed, this great debating society is able to exist once again because we do not need to worry about the security climate.
On that point?
Yes?
Are you speaking from the position of like the IRA terror cells or from the state? Because the motion is this House will negotiate with terrorists.
I'll come on to that. Let me be clear. The IRA were terrorists. The UDA and UVF were terrorists. I will never deny the unique hardships both unionists and nationalists, often the bottom rung of society, faced in those fateful years late in the 60s, nor will I ever conceal my disgust at the heinous acts committed during the Troubles by many sides, including members of the police and security forces. But the bombing of civilians, whereby masked men relied on the security forces to shepherd people away from the bombs they planted, claiming to absolve themselves of responsibility if anything went wrong, I can't bring myself to accord sanction to that. It's not my place, not within my gift. There were other ways of pursuing political objectives, but amidst the chaos of the Troubles' formative years, it was the small groups of armed ideologues who took the often justified anguish and fear and trauma, fed off it, and won out over any effort to quickly defuse the situation. On one hand, yes?
How do you square the sort of moral relevancy argument with the definition of terrorists as targeting civilians specifically? You overlook that mostly.
Yeah, well, I'm coming on to it, I'm sure we'll both talk. On one hand, it would have been great to have found a military means to crush terrorism here. But we know even if that were possible, that wouldn't be the problem solved. To many, the security forces, while not terrorists, did not command moral authority themselves. Investigations into systemic failure within them continue. Moreover, if the state did crush the paramilitaries shortly after their emergence, it absolutely couldn't have commanded moral authority if business as usual presumed, with working class people on both sides and nationalists continuing to face marginalisation from a majoritarian regime. What would stop violence breaking out again in the future? Perhaps worse violence which could not be crushed. then negotiation would have been ultimately necessary. I do not believe in sweeping statements like the means justify the ends. Rather, I ask, do these particular means justify these particular ends? Have you ever heard of Adam Busby? He founded the Scottish National Liberation. He wanted an independent Scotland and believed the devolution referendum of 1979 was fixed. It was him on his own sending people letter bombs. I wouldn't get him around the table and start asking him what his demands are. I'd lock him up. I'm happy to take part in this debate, but I object to the implication in its premise that negotiating with terrorists is either always justified or never. To me, we only really need one example of where negotiating with terrorists has worked, in this case Northern Ireland, to show that while it can never be a silver bullet, it is a legitimate tool which has its use cases. The conflict in the Basque Country ended in 2011 because they negotiated with terrorists. The conflict in Colombia ended last year because they negotiated with terrorists. Negotiating with terrorists is a tool, not an entire policy or doctrine in and of itself. Where military means will not crush them, negotiation is a pragmatic necessity. Where they represent a substantial section of people who have been shut out of politics and society, negotiation is a moral necessity. Whichever one describes best the situation, we can all agree 4 deaths a year is better than 117. Let's hope it's 0 soon. Thank you.
We call Mr Lauren Carberry O'Neill for that.
Speaking on what's just been said, we do not need just one example. In what form of anything is that ever the truth? We don't test medicine on one subject. We don't do that. It has to be seen to be working across a breadth of places. You cannot say that work here, great, it's going well. You can't do that. I'm not going to deliver a case study to you. I'm going to try and generalise this so the House can best understand my argument. I'm not going to praise a small amount of negotiative successes, if you would even call them successes. They need to be long term. I'm going to best critique the current care systems as well, because I think that's important. We're not suggesting that any current systems in place to not negotiate or to negotiate are being done well. That is not what we're trying to say. We're trying to say that in principle, this is not what should be done. So firstly, I'm going to start with an analogy that I hope everyone is going to get. There's good parenting and bad parenting. A child goes into a shop with their parent, the child starts screaming, throwing a mad tantrum. A good parent will discipline the child. A good parent will try and teach the child that that is not the way to be. A bad parent will buy Candy Crush drink and 4 sweets and give it to the child to pacify the child. That is not what our government is here to do. We should demand more of them.
On that
point? No, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so if we're talking about bad parents, isn't using force with the terrorist groups also being a bad parent? Because you're attacking the child, let's say, if you're doing that analogy.
No,
then that's what you're suggesting.
No. I'm not suggesting that we go and try and wipe the terrorists off the face of the earth, because I don't think that is how it is to be done. As Conor said, ISIS would seem to be militarily educated at the moment. War is war and it happens. I do not believe, however, that how do I put this way? It's not like any war number. I don't agree that force is the best way. What I'm trying to say is that there should be, because we pay our taxes and elect our governments and should demand more of them, there should be political systems implemented that are stable and don't grant dangerous precedents. That it shouldn't be a case of they did this, let's send our armies on the ground, because then that in turn puts the governments in a bad situation where they seem just as bad. Democratic values are that we do not condone violence, we do not reward it. And as Conor said, governments have a higher moral authority, and we must stand with that.
On that point,
yes.
You can't surely be saying that every state, even in the last century, has had moral authority over those that might have resisted certain regimes.
No, absolutely not. There are corrupt states, there are bad states, and there are good states. I'm talking about in a situation where it's done best, where it's done where it's done the best that it can be. Not in a situation where you have states which are corrupt from the inside and are committing crimes against their own people. But that doesn't make them terrorists. The motion is the plan that we negotiate with them, and we dispute that entirely. But, as Conor said as well, we don't dispute communication. Communication facilitates us buying time. It also may facilitate, in the terms of the terrorists, someone to communicate with us. And also, in terms of terrorists seeking communication with us, it may buy them time. And we cannot depend on the good faith of terrorists. We do not know what they're doing within that time. Negotiations are far too unpredictable in terms of terrorists. What negotiating with terrorists does is it undermines international efforts to outlaw terrorism. The UN and countable nations come together to try and outlaw terrorism, to say that we shouldn't negotiate with them. Not that this means that the big American display of might is the right way to go, but that says something, that these nations that don't tend to always agree on something can come together and agree on that. It also undermines the peaceful political actors, and it undermines each and every effort made against terrorism. We legitimise them by making them seem acknowledged by our politics from the opinion that we elect our governments. And I'm talking about democracy, so I'm talking about, as I say, when it's done best. Our politics should not facilitate that. Our politics should strive for more. Negotiation is a positive word, and it sounds democratic and progressive, but I don't think you should be sucked in by it. There is levels, there is a scale of extremes within extremism. There are, at this end, the less ideological groups, the PLO, the IRA, they have localised games where you can, as a being, rationally see why they may do what they do. At the far end, we have the extreme ideological and fundamental. They have absolute goals. Al-Qaeda, Hamas, ISIS, KKK. These things we cannot rationalise in our minds. Therefore, how can we seek to negotiate with these types of people? Terrorism and irrationality, in my mind, are great friends. I think that whenever we expand the definition of terrorism too far, we completely dilute it. We make terrorism lose what it's supposed to. When you hear the word terrorism, it does something to you. It's an emotive word. But that doesn't make every corrupt state, every bad action against civilians, a terrorist act. We should not blanket this over all bad actions. So to conclude, negotiation is okay, and it is indeed to be sought out if each respective party is reliable and committed to fair and feasible compromise. As I said, how can you negotiate with a group that are inherently irrational and will not in any way seek to compromise along your lines?
Okay, I call Mr Ciaran Gallagher, HLM.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Very much. I think I can afford to be rather brief given the excellent artillery that's going to follow me. But that was not. I think I'll start out. First of all, actually, I don't think it's been very clearly defined so far. This is not a debate on whether we would always negotiate with terrorists. Of course, there are cases in which it would be immoral to do so. Of course, there are cases in which it would be futile to do so. This is simply an argument that we would. Not always, but neither never. Anyway, to start off with an anecdote from 1585. There was a Scottish chieftain by the name of Sorby Fionnbharr, actually, I think it's pronounced, whose son was executed for rebelling in Ireland against the English government. And a rather callous English soldier pointed out to the father the boy's head pinned on a spike and said something to the effect of, "This is the head of your son, the face of a traitor." To which it's reported the father replied, "My son has many heads." And that teaches you all you know, I think, all you need to know about the challenge of eradicating terrorism. It is ineradicable. And so is a cause, whatever name it comes under. Before ISIS, there was Al-Qaeda. After ISIS, there will be something else until the problem itself is addressed. Bombing them, shooting them, and laying them out in the ditch in front of their friends and family, fine in circumstances where civilians are at imminent risk, but it is not the be-all and end-all of how you deal with some of these things. On that point, go. Am I in correct time? No. Go ahead.
Look, we've never made the claim that we're trying to eradicate these people out of existence. You can make the case, surely, that ISIS, there's been no progress made against ISIS through military action. There very clearly has been. They've lost their capital as of about a week ago. They have no more sizable territory.
You're missing my point. The point is, even if you do eradicate them, the legacy of the grievance carries on and manifests as something in the next generation. Basically what I'm saying is, and this is the problem, what do you do if you don't either eradicate them or engage them? What is the third option? I don't believe there is any case of a third option ever working, whatever it is. If the opposition wants to bring one up, fine, we can debate it. But in the meantime, the reality is you either make peace with your enemies or you eliminate them. And I think the problem as well is we see terrorism as groups that are filled with malicious psychopaths and nothing else. If you looked at case studies of terrorist cells, of course, these are the people who can be found to head them and lead them and to help build that. But they are only built off the foundations of people who feel aggrieved, who feel like they've been sidelined somehow and don't have another option. In some cases, this is over petty stuff. In some cases, it is over rights. In some cases, it's over starving families, things like this. I don't think, it was also said, when it comes to the legitimacy of violence, if you can legitimize it itself, I'm personally not a total pacifist, but I don't think the line is between, I'm not convinced that it's between state actors and non-state actors. I think a better compromise of a definition of it would be something like, it is the difference between the last resort and the second last resort. Would you, for example, the French resistance were not a state actor, but who would blame them for their actions? The Jews in the National Socialist regime were far from state actors. Who would blame them? So that's what I mean when I say not all terrorists, but sometimes. On that point, if you must.
So this idea, this kind of dichotomy between people with a grievance equals terrorism, which you seem to have ignored. What about the moderate, non-violent political actors who are often undermined by negotiating with the violent terrorist actors on the ground?
Sorry, would you repeat that? Sorry.
So, my point is that, what do you think of the fact that by negotiating with violent terrorist actors, we often ignore the third option, which is the peaceful moderates who become overlooked when you negotiate with the hardliners?
Through the presence of a large campaign, and I'm not talking about smaller campaigns like, for example, the European wings of ISIS, if that actually ever existed. But for much larger and well supported within their communities. That is evidence, I think, that that first option hasn't worked. Not always. But again, this is our advantage on this side of the house. It doesn't have to always be the case. Now, what else was I going to say? Bear with me. Yeah, so actually, sorry, I was saying we see them terrorists as sort of these malicious psychopaths, as I said. The terrorist groups, the larger ones at least, will be made up of the young, the old, the malicious and seekers of justice, people who don't actually want to risk life, limb and liberty of that and themselves and their family, except for the fact that they're pushed to do so. Most cases, for example, of the Somalian pirates, most pirates in Somalia become what they become because they have families which they cannot feed. So it is a case of either steal food at gunpoint or their family dies. It's perfectly moral to say, it's a perfectly moral and noble thing to say I would rather starve, but I wouldn't necessarily judge another human being for making that call. I'm terribly sorry that I didn't get to finish at least half of what I've written down, but half of it is a bloody scribble. But in any case, I'm not that much worried because at the end of the day, history is on our side, especially in this region of the world, as we know. That, as far as I'm concerned, is all we need that we could go on. I'll leave it at that and leave you in the very capable hands of the soon-to-be Dr. Crosby. Take care.
Mr. Hugh Dobbin for the opportunity.
Good evening, everyone. If you would take a look at your order cards today, you will see that it was supposedly going to be Miss Beth McSorley who was going to be speaking third in the opposition. Unfortunately, I must inform you all that you've got me. So, So hopefully I'll be able to give a speech that is much smarter than my dress sense. No, it's partly been a sticking point during this debate of Northern Ireland. We've already made clear on our side of the House that we don't want this to become an individual case study on an individual case of when we did negotiate with terrorists, but I'm going to mention it briefly here to try and nip it in the bud. It's important to note that as the opposition, it's our role to define what we as the state would do if this motion were opposed. It's what our alternative is. And so we're going to say, yes, we wouldn't negotiate with terrorists, but also we would carry out entirely different actions if we have to look retrospectively than what the British government did. We're not going to incite violence in the same way that we did. We would not send the army to do the police's job in the same way that they did. Yeah.
I see like a big mistake between both of your cases because the first person speaking was talking about violence against enforce against these terrorist groups as an alternative, and then you're trying to keep the peace. How is it going to be complementary?
No, because this entire debate has rested on the fact that we are taking a wholesale look at terrorism. We would take a different approach with other group of terrorists, a different approach with the IRA, a different approach with any terrorist group, but an approach that does not involve negotiation. Now, as I see it, this debate rests on two focal points. Those two being that of consequence, and those being that of principle. Now, first, I'm going to talk about what the consequence is of negotiating with terrorists, and why the consequences are much more favourable on our side of the House. We have to ask ourselves, what happens when we negotiate with terrorists? There is a danger in many cases of that of what ideas we can try and normalise. We've accepted acts of terror as those that are against the state and its people. If we are willing to, bring those people on many occasions, or agree that in most occasions, those are the kinds of people that we want to bring to the table, then what kind of precedent does that set? What kind of people are we willing to bring to the tables in the future? And to what degree are we willing to offer them concessions in order to maintain peace? What we say is that it is preferable that as far as possible we reject the ideas that are proposed by terrorists to minimise the impact that they can have on society. Because we should try and accept that terrorism, as we see it, for the state is a bad thing to have, and that it's something we don't wish to have. And to address something that's said by the proposition throughout most of this debate, it is foolish to try and predicate it on historical examples. The concept of negotiation has changed very much historically. To try and suggest we are negotiating the same way now as we would as a democratic society, the same way that the French monarchy would, or the same way that a dictatorship in the Middle East would, is entirely preposterous.
On that point, sir.
Yes.
There's an awful lot to learn from history, as in contrary to the fact that governments have short-term memories, terrorists have very long-term memories. They know their own history very well, and they learn from the mistakes of other governments, and they learn from the successes of other armed groups.
So, we have to ask ourselves, what are the aims of these armed groups? And armed groups that we see in the world today have mostly malicious goals. And those that are in foreign countries, we have to ask ourselves where is our role to bring them to our negotiating tables and what our rules negotiating are. Our side of the house is not this house would militarily engage with all terrorists, is that we would not negotiate with them. And this is in all cases we would not negotiate with them. This could be UN sanctions, could be economic sanctions, could be, yes.
So, how's the UN going to sanction ISIS? What's that actually going to do?
No. Sanctions was a poor choice of words. It's that. It was, I'll admit that. It's that these are very often the cases, as we see with ISIS these days, and the largest terrorist groups across the world. It becomes a matter of international as well as national relations, and we have to ask ourselves, where is our role in this? So, those are the consequences of negotiating with terrorists. And what we've said on our side of the house is that we believe it's better to take an alternative approach because we don't want to breed or normalise ideas of terrorism within democracy today. And that we believe that the better consequence we have is when we choose to reject the rise of terrorism or our ability to accept terrorism at a negotiating table, or to say that it is a legitimate means of political aims in the modern world, is an idea that we oppose. Alright, I'll bring up Northern Ireland one last time, is I would have entirely preferred that the civil rights movement hadn't been undermined by the actions of the IRA, and that movement rose because of the actions of the British government, ones which went above and beyond what they should have done in the response to the threat by the civil rights and the much smaller IRA movement at the time. It is clear that whenever we deal with terrorism appropriately, and we don't blow it out of proportion, then it is not necessary to try and bring them to the negotiating table. And that they're,
terrorists are also very good. Then, as in the case of the old IRA, no matter how the British government responded, if they responded leniently or proportionately, the Irish spin that as a point of weakness.
So, So, to wrap up, I agree with what, well, I don't agree, but I take the point that Mr Fionnbharr Rodgers has given. However, it's clear to me to see that in consequence, there is much more danger in negotiating with terrorists. This allows ideas to fester. It allows us to normalise the impact of terrorist groups and their ideologies within democratic systems, within our governments, and what we want to approach. And also in principle, the idea that we're willing to accept these ideas and that they are something that we try and promote. And we must ask ourselves that in the cases of where they are freedom fighters, and we don't accept that in all states there is a moral authority possessed by the state. And so we don't believe that it is often our role to make them negotiate there, or even to say that the form of negotiation which will be present, as this House proposes, is relevant in those kinds of societies. As we see it, in the way that the world is, we have to oppose those who are violent and those who are the enemies of progress. And that is the major danger with this motion today, and why I say absolutely that I never would and will not negotiate with terrorists. Did that make sense?
Sorry, could you say that again? I didn't quite get that.
I call Mr Crosby for that proposition.
Mr Chair, assembled fellowship. The points I have rather coalesced into two camps. The first of which I'd like to talk about is as the proctologist said to the architect, you might have your ideas, but in real life they're really that simple, and in real life they're a hell of a lot messy. We've heard at length from three speakers that we're not going to get bogged down into talking about examples. We're not going to get bogged down in case studies. Now, I may not be a fancy big city medieval historian, but it seems to me the reason they don't want to talk about case studies and examples is because they've got practically none. We have given you examples of negotiation with so-called terrorist forces, producing peaceful outcomes, reducing violence, and ultimately paving the way for the stability that keeps them awake at night with glee. And yet they've just said, oh, we're not going to get bogged down in examples. We're not going to get bogged down in examples. Okay, let's have it. Let's have it.
Whenever Tony Blair and Bush sought out to negotiate with the Taliban got stronger and things got worse. There's your bad example.
Correlation is not causation. There are a series of international events stretching back to the 60s and the 70s and the 1890s that are at play there. I joked with the President earlier that everything good that happens in my flight. Oh, you're pointing to the wall, sorry. Everything good that happens under the reign of a president is that president's responsibility, and everything bad happens to them somehow. Like there's some ancient king of the bean or king of winter to borrow from Fraser. From Dr.
You're scaring me, Mr. Crosby.
Good. Now, I will say, and I'll say this to the detriment of my own side and to our opponents, we have not heard a reliable definition of terrorism. Our opponents like to lump in this idea that, oh, it's state actors versus non-state actors. So, you also mentioned that ISIS, or IS, or ISIL, for a while controlled an amount of territory. They have a constitution of sorts, they control territory, and they had a hierarchy. So, at what point did they become a state and therefore cease to be a terrorist force? Did that ever happen? Because if it didn't, then this sort of state, non-state distinction is foolish. Likewise, in the 60s and 70s and 80s, we see the American CIA and the KGB operating plain clothes within South America, stirring up rebellion against governments. In this case, go on.
It was made clear.
Are you afraid, Mr. Dobbin? Last time I found something for that, Mr. Gallagher overruled me, so I will say that...
This isn't counting against my time, is it?
No.
It was made clear in my speech that whenever the moral authority lines become blurred and it becomes a matter of international relations and the idea of what is or isn't a state becomes so confused that becomes a matter that is outside our authority and therefore isn't a matter on which we should be open to negotiating with.
Oh, I see. So as soon as things get hairy, we don't negotiate at all. We pull out and we hide.
Yeah.
That seems very, very... Have the Americans decided that, oh, we don't want to talk about states, this is all too scary. Had they decided to stay on the other side of the Atlantic, the peace process might still be well behind what it is now. The fact of the matter is, what happens in other parts of the world affects us. We cannot simply erect walls, we cannot simply say, oh, that's the world, we're not part of the world, we're something else. We have to be open, if not to negotiate for ourselves, but to facilitate negotiations between other groups. It is an important part of nations with wealth, nations with political clout. It is an important part of their role in the world that they not only negotiate, but facilitate negotiations between other nations. It is through their influence that stability and peace can come back. Speaking on the topic of stability, I also noticed earlier that you seemed to sort of say, stability is good at all costs, that's fine. Whereas in the real world, in the proctologist world, not the architect world, stability isn't always the hallmark of a democratic government. Quite often we find that while the most democratic governments with the longest history of freedoms and the greatest number of keys to power have a great deal of stability, there is a great and terrifying valley of petty dictators, pseudo-democracies, oligarchies and the like, where there is a great deal of instability. And then, at the far side of that valley, we see the most entrenched and powerful tyrants, the hunters with the backing of the military and certain sections of the international community. If this group were to declare a genocide against a section of their population, and that section of the population would fight back, our opponents are essentially arguing that we must side with the genociders, not the genocidees, because they're the state actor. That's stability, that's what we need. Go on.
Well, the argument was that we wouldn't side with these states, we wouldn't define them as terrorists. They'd be war crimes. These aren't arbitrary distinctions here. This is between a war criminal and a regime and a terrorist. I'd like to hear your opinion.
Oh, certainly, of course. What I was implying there is that you would negotiate with war criminals, which you have not said you wouldn't, but you would not negotiate with terrorists. So you automatically open yourselves up to say, oh, we'll negotiate with the powerful because they're stable, but we won't negotiate with the little guy because they're not government, they're not the state. even though, as we've seen from my arguments, from the arguments of my comrades, there is a significant blurring in the cases of civil wars, in the cases of actors between what are officially recognised states, traditional, I hesitate to use the word ethnic groups because it comes loaded, but groups whose existence as cohesive organisations predates that sort of 19th century mad rush for flags and tedious Viennese national anthems that sort of come to nationalism. I've talked around this definition, but it seems to me that in the lack of a stable definition, you are simply saying, we wouldn't negotiate with people we don't like.
On that point?
No. You are simply saying that, people, non-state actors that we don't agree with are terrorists. And, you know, if you're going to do that, it's essentially just labelling. You're just saying, these are terrorists, they're not, we like them, we don't like them. Now, I will confess, as my final point, there are some I'm going to have to skip here, so you're just going to have to imagine that I've exhorted you to brilliance if I haven't already. Our opponents are offering you something that seems very commonsensical. They're offering you something that, in your heart of hearts, you feel that you might want. They've offended, they've done wrong, and we will punish them. We will drive them into the ground like bloody tent pegs. But the problem is, as you do that, further groups come forward. We aren't offering that which seems honourable or valiant. We're not offering anything easy, and we're not offering you anything clear-cut. What we are offering you is difficult. What we are offering you may seem dubious, but what we are offering you is peace and the chance of lives saved. Yeah, you might want to leave negotiation till later, till maybe you've killed a few more children, white phosphorus a few more villages, and starved a few more rural peasants before you decide that you're quite strong enough to negotiate with these terrorists. Nevertheless, at that point, whether you extend the olive branch, or they extend the olive branch, or someone puts a cryptic clue in the Times to indicate that olive branches might be extended, you are negotiating with terrorists. You have two choices, negotiate or exterminate. There is no middle ground, and we would negotiate. Thank you.
Okay, last but not least, Mr Fionnbharr Rodgers for the opposition.
Well, that certainly was a tough act to follow. We saw the Soviet Union fall apart yesterday. Today we see India disintegrate. In the flames of war, when tomorrow comes, we shall see the United States of America burn. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the war cry of the Lashkar-e-Taiba, a South Asian terrorist organization with close links to the Al-Qaeda. Now, how can you reason with people who have these statements as the base of all their demands? As the last speaker tonight of an evening which must already seem long, I have just one question for you. How would you define a friend? The simplest definition, a template of a friend as it were, would be of someone who respects your right to life, of someone who lets you live your life the way you want to live, and of someone who should be treated as your equal. A terrorist is none of those. We indeed had our guest chair saying that if we hate someone, sit down and have a meal with them. That, however, isn't really possible, because that solution is one that does not really or significantly alter the broader conflict between two parties in any way. Because most negotiations nowadays don't focus on the broader conflict or the conflict as a whole, but rather on a particular incident that has taken place under the greater umbrella of the terrorist movement. Because terrorists are predominantly uneducated, so it takes time for governments to educate them about the possibilities and the structure of a negotiation. And if this terrorist movement does indeed have religion at its base, then it takes even longer. Because if you've received your instructions from God himself, well, we all know God doesn't compromise. I'm surprised this actually wasn't spoken about or raised by the proposition. I was hoping that it would. But I believe that we should focus on the victims of terrorist attack or the hostages of a terrorist situation here. And negotiators actually use this tactic called contain and negotiate, where it's a wonderful, brilliant tactic, an effective method of sitting down, carefully folding their hands and waiting. That is a fact, ladies and gentlemen. The stage during which victims or hostages pray for mercy, beg, and for some kind of miracle from God is actually a stage of complete inactivity for the negotiators. So all arguments that negotiations are indeed for peaceful means and to help the hostages are nothing but propaganda. I'm sorry, the 1972 Munich Olympics, simply one example for botched up negotiation that used this tactic. Now, the second speaker from the proposition indeed said that we should not engage in violence until all democratic and peaceful means have been used. This, however, ladies and gentlemen, we need to realize that it's not a one-way street. There needs to be democracy and peace from both sides before any kind of agreement is reached. And once violence has commenced, I'm afraid we don't really have a choice. Because governments need to test, explore, probe with the terrorists until they can make sure that these extremists are indeed willing to renounce violence and they're not just playing for time, valuable time, that they could use to regroup, rearm, reload. And that takes a long while. And reservoirs of patience. And each time a government negotiates or confirms or sits down across the table with the terrorist movement, it is actually raising that movement to a position of moral equivalency. It is legitimizing and validating that terrorist organization, the legitimacy and validation that most of these organizations crave. The recognition that they crave is being handed to them. Now, there's no question of using negotiations as an alternative to military force during a terrorist attack. That's more or less obvious. But even in a situation where it is indeed possible to use negotiations alongside military might, it still cannot be acceptable in most cases. Because terrorist organizations are not monolithic. They're not monoliths. They're divided into factions. And while one faction may indeed support negotiations, another might staunchly be against it, and that puts the heads of the terrorist organization in a fix. Because the majority of terrorist factions are indeed not open to negotiations by principle. And to lose that valuable time and those resources for 1 in every 10 or 15 situations, whatever, just isn't acceptable, because there is no way to have an enclave of clean water in a dirty, polluted river. It cannot work, ladies and gentlemen. So having heard all our arguments tonight, when you sit down to decide which stand you want to take, what you believe in, if you do indeed believe to side with the proposition, if you do indeed believe that we should negotiate with people who are trained and brainwashed to kill and spill innocent blood, then not only would you be in complete violation of the Create Agreement that prohibits any kind of negotiation with any terrorist organization, one that was coincidentally signed here in Northern Ireland 4 years ago, but you would actually be encouraging the terrorists and encouraging further such situations of terrorism, as researchers from the University of Texas, who, unlike our esteemed proposition tonight, studied each and every case of terrorism from 2001 to 2013, and they concluded in a survey published in the European Journal for Political Economy that each and every successful negotiation meant a 66 to 87% increase in the likelihood of further such situations. So if you want studies and examples and proof, it's available. So the US releasing 5 high-level terrorists, this was quite a situation a few years ago. The US releasing 5 high-level terrorists in return for 1 soldier may indeed seem very noble and valiant at first, but some time passes and you realize that now the terrorists know that for every 1 soldier they can receive 5 of their comrades. And you start to worry a little, because this ratio can only increase. Maybe some more time passes, and now for every 5 soldiers there are 25 to 30 terrorists being released, and suddenly this negotiation does not seem so noble anymore. It's like the Irish philosopher said, Edmund Burke, and I quote, "People crushed by the law have no hopes but from power. If law is their enemy, then they will be enemies of the law." And those who have much to hope and nothing to lose will always be dangerous. The opposition's argument was largely based around one person's terrorist was another person's freedom fighter. But that just proves how different perceptions and worldviews abound throughout the history of our tiny planet. And just as it is impossible to win in a marriage, ladies and gentlemen, it is impossible to win a negotiation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roger, and all of the excellent speakers this evening for some fine speeches indeed, such as the double-edged sword of a 4v4 debate. That whilst you do get a lot of intelligence from debate, you also get a lot of debating, and so the time is now quite late. So I shall have to ask that you attempt to make your questions as concise as possible, in the interest of getting as many answers as well, if at all possible. So, first of all, are there any questions for the proposition not being this side? Mr. Hickman. No, Mr. Mackin, sorry. You've spoken already.
So the proposition seems to come from the point of view that we should take a pragmatic approach to terrorism. But the motion tonight is this House would negotiate with terrorists, which is a unilateral declaration. Would you vote in favour of the declaration, making that being that in all future instances after the declaration is made, terrorists know that you would be willing to negotiate with them, giving the terrorists the upper hand from the beginning?
Who would like to respond?
Oh, Robert, it's funny.
Well, work it out yourselves.
Robert,
yes, you want to come?
I disagree with the point that it's giving the terrorists the upper hand immediately, because states are inherently stronger because they're states. If you take the example, the obvious example, one of the oldest of Israel and Palestine, the Israeli government has absolutely no need to negotiate because they're one of the strongest economies in the world, they're one of the strongest militaries in the world, backed up by the only remaining superpower, who will back them to the hilt. And on the other side, you have Hamas and the PLO, who are glorified stone throwers with a few rocket launchers. And so that's why the Israeli government currently has no interest in negotiating, because realistically, why would it? But that is still ongoing because they do not want to lose the world opinion by committing genocide of Palestinian people, which is the only real way that they can solve the issue, because Palestinian people are still there. And there's also that I just want to address one from Mr O'Neill about ceasefires that they're buying time. That's not true at all, because it's a misconception. Because ceasefires, groups that walk away from the negotiating table will find it a lot harder to rebuild the momentum that they had before. And in Israel-Palestine, whenever there is a ceasefire, life goes back to normal in Israel and it becomes just a regular country. But the problem is, life also goes back to normal in Palestine, but that's significantly worse. All the same restrictions exist, but the only difference is that they no longer have the only thing that is giving them any attention at all.
Thank you, Mr. Rodgers. Who was nice at all? No, but it was very eloquent. Right from the opposition would like to respond. Mr. Dobbin.
Okay, so I'd like to begin answering this question by addressing a point made by Scott Moore and say that it's ludicrous we can base this debate on the idea that if we can, throughout all of human history, find a single successful case of negotiation with terrorists, that proves they win this debate. Instead, the clear intention here is that we take a wholesale look at terrorism as a whole and identify a much simpler question: whether we, as a state, looking at a violent non-state actor which is in opposition to the state, whether or not we would be willing to negotiate with them. And in that vein, every single case made by the proposition has been organised on pretense and historical examples. Before answering this question and deciding where we fall, we must ask whether we must ask, because we do not have the pretense of whether that has been a ceasefire. We do not have the pretense of whether or not this happens in a country where the ideas of authority and where the moral right lies. We do not have that advantage to analyse the pros and cons of that in every single instance. And that's the idea that I tried to make, is that this is a debate based on principle. And we must analyse in principle, without being able to take that retrospective historical analysis, which we don't have looking in future, whether or not we are willing to bring terrorists to a negotiating table.
Thank you, Mr. Dobbin. Are there any questions for the opposition? Mr O'Neill. Oh, Mr. Neil, sorry. Apologies.
I'll direct this at last top. So you mentioned that how terrorist groups are splitting factions within themselves, therefore making it pointless to negotiate with them. I would take the opposite view and say that that's exactly why we should. If you have factions within a terrorist group on which can be negotiated with, then there are people of which can be reasoned with. Therefore, you can pit them against the other factions of which cannot be reasoned with, to therefore take what was once a unified force and weaken them from within, divide and conquer. That to me strikes me as an effective military strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Neil. Mr. Rush, you respond?
As good as that sounds, would you negotiate with a faction of terrorist organization? Would you negotiate with a faction of the Al-Qaeda? Or would you negotiate with the Al-Qaeda as a whole? No matter what a faction believes, the negotiation is always under the name of the organization as a whole. And what I was talking about wasn't exactly a government's point of view, but rather the terrorist organization's point of view in itself. Because there, within the organization, it is difficult to make a decision when there are a majority of factions not willing to negotiate by principle.
Thank you, Mr. Roger. Mr. Crosby, to respond?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, sorry. The left part. So it would seem to me that our opposition and we seem to have a very different idea of who we are, specifically we. They seem to think that we're some kind of moral being created last week that has historically done no wrong, which I think means that we must be talking about entirely separate organisations. Because I think we kind of represent the genocidal, native population exterminating, firebombing cities out of pure, bloody-minded malice, United Kingdom of Great Britain, practically Northern Ireland. If there's going to be a situation in which morally dubious actors can't sit down and talk, then there is not going to be any negotiation between state and state, between man and wife, between parents and children. The fact of the matter is we are all compromised. We have all done dirt, and we all need to sit down and make sure that while we're talking about victims, we include the victims of the future as well as the victims of the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crosby. Are there now any abstaining points of the motions? That's a question that can be directed to both sides evenly. Yes, sir, in the blue there.
Yes, I was wondering whether either side might be able to debate the notion of whether unilateral political and social reform can come into this debate, sort of pulling the rug from underneath the terrorists rather than outright negotiation.
Thank you very much, sir.
My surname?
Yeah. Eddie Thank you, sir, for your question. I'll ask the proposition to respond first. Who would care to do so?
You say opposition.
Oh, that's correct. Indeed, proposition. Are you saying? Proposition.
Would it be bad thing to ask him to clarify?
No, you can ask her to clarify.
Can you clarify your motion, please?
It's quite often assumed that terrorism happens because of discontent. That's come up already. If a state says in response to terrorism we're going to alleviate certain burdens or invest in certain sectors of the economy or grant political rights, is that not an option as well as negotiation or instead of negotiating?
I don't think it is an option instead of negotiating. I think it is negotiating. They have grievances and we are listening to I think it is the same as negotiating. They have grievances and we're offering to sort them out. We're not giving them everything they want, but we're giving them enough to be satisfied. Nobody wins in a negotiation. We just try and not lose as much as we can. And if you can allay terrorism by offering greater rights, greater freedoms, more economic prosperity, and a better future for all the little kiddywinks of the nation, then by God I say you should do it.
Would anybody from the opposition like to respond?
Sure.
Mr MacNamara.
Yeah, it's a great point, and contrary to Mr Crosby here says, it's actually the third option away from negotiation. We see, for example, in Palestine, in Iraq, in Syria, what you do is you do not negotiate with terrorists. Instead, what you do is you pioneer reformers to try and pull that social and systematic growth out from under them. We see this, for example, in the work of, if anyone's ever heard of the great Islamic reformer Majid Nawa. He's done fantastic work on setting up an alternative ideology to the die-hard, hardline terrorist actors on the ground. You're exactly right. You don't reward them by negotiating with them. What you do is you undermine them by backing moderate actors who can then compete with them and pull that little bit of support out from under them.
Thank you, Mr MacNamara. I think, seeing as how we still have a closing address and a vote to get through, just one more round of questions. We really need to figure out how to get more of these. This is clearly interesting to me. I don't believe you've spoken yet, Mr O'Neill, so...
It's his birthday.
Yes, and it's also your birthday. This is my birthday. Proposition.
Oh, okay.
Questions to the proposition. Proposition. Seeing as how, oh, you do look so very eager, but I did pull it out from under Mr Hickman. I'll give it to Mr Hickman. I'll give it to Mr McDonald.
Please thank us, Mr Hickman.
Just a point, from a point of information brought by the proposition, as terrorists are very good at spin, it doesn't matter what governments do, if they act leniently or strictly, they will be able to make it appear to their own advantage. Could that not be the perfect argument against never, ever negotiating with terrorists on the basis that they will always misinterpret and they will always spin the outcome of negotiations to their own ends, as you so aptly described with the negotiations with the Irish Republic?
Thank you, Mr. Hickman. Mr. Rodgers to respond.
No, because, well, I mean, if we're talking about in terms of the Irish Republicans, they were always eager to negotiate. Jerry Adams very much so. And in fact, the Ulster Union's habit of mediation and negotiation was to speak to them via the chair. And they refused point blank to speak to Jerry Adams, and so he took accosted them in the gents by the urinal. Jerry's personality. But probably invited them to his knitting circle. And also that very thing has also made the Good Friday Agreement more stable, because Sinn Féin and the IRA obviously lost. There is no very kind of social proposal. Militarism has once again failed, and we're back to constitutional nationalism as the mainstream. We're in this new age of pornalism. But because Sinn Féin have managed to positively spin the Good Friday Agreement and to look at visit what we are now in government, the nationalist community now has a say. They have managed to build consensus around peace.
Thank you, Mr. Rodgers. Would anybody from the opposition can respond to that? Don't have to, but Mr. MacNamara.
Yeah, it's a fantastic point, and seeing as we're on a rampage of historical case studies here, I'll throw in one and say that terrorist spin is exactly the reason why even a failed negotiation can come back and bite you years later again and again and again and again. See, for example, how Hamas has used the Oslo agreements, UN Resolution 242, Madrid, the 96 agreements, Camp David, countless attempts by Israel to negotiate with them, all of which failed, all of which have then been recycled back into a narrative to justify their military actions. That is why you don't negotiate with terrorism, because they are so good at spinning it back against you.
Forwards? No, I can see that you're dying inside there, Mr. Rodgers, but I'm very sorry. For the opposition, then, I will give it to Conor MacNamara.
Oh, what?
Just because he's on the council.
Sorry for misquoting my first point.
It's surprised that it really is.
Thank you. Thank you all for birthday wishes, they're much appreciated. This mainly goes to the last speaker, Mr Rodgers, on the opposition. With regard to human lives, you eloquently put that yes, we need to think about the victims while negotiating with terrorists, but is there an element where, if we're to take this sort of hierarchical view of morality, should we also be thinking about the future victims, not just the one in the street, but the one that will also be in the street in 2 or 3 and 4 weeks' time? And I think we should also think about the victims that are actually involved in the terrorism. As you rightly put, ill-educated people mainly involve themselves in such things, and so do we have a moral authority to try and step in and save these people from themselves? For example, the IRA, lots of people who were mandated in from the IRA to serve after Bloody Sunday and stuff, and there was lots of young people who then went and served and died and committed war crimes because of it. And do we have a moral right to then step in and try and stop this?
Thank you, Mr O'Neill. Mr. Hazard to respond.
I'm sorry, I lost you.
Sorry, yes, I didn't really phrase that correctly with a question at the end, but it's basically the idea of, yes, we shouldn't negotiate because there's victims involved and it spits in their face effectively, but do you not think that we should try and negotiate because there will be future victims if we don't?
I think the main argument that I put forward was that we should not be negotiating because of the amount of time that it takes for negotiations to fall through. It took years in the case of Northern Ireland. It would take years in any other matter. Whereas the number of victims that would have been avoided under any other kind of method used, I'm not going to restrict myself to military use, but under any other method, it would make a lot more.
People give you the Henry.
Exactly, not reward bad behavior. Alright. But yeah, that kind of sums up my point. There is no way to bring every negotiation, as I said, there is no way to legitimize the actions. And once you legitimize an action, then for every situation, the terrorists will indeed use the same method to deal with governments or institutions. As Mr. Rodgers said, terrorists do indeed have long memories. So every successful negotiation with a terrorist organization will indeed result in further situations where the terrorist organization or multiple terrorist organizations will use or will subject the government or any institution into a situation where they are forced to negotiate.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. For the proposition, anyone care to respond? Mr. Crosby?
Yes, I remember that time. So, you mentioned the future there, this idea that terrorists will learn and they'll negotiate in the future. I believe it was the guerrilla military strategist Hans von Dack, usually a Swissman. Anyway, it was him who said that essentially that a person who joins a guerrilla movement and commits himself to the guerrilla movement lives with the knowledge that they might well die fighting for whatever cause. If we negotiate now, it gives a message to future terrorists that these are people who will negotiate. If we do not, it sends a message, these are people who do not negotiate, and with them it must be war to the knife. Red to the elbows, no surrender, no negotiation, kill as many civilians as you can, fight them down to win. They will never win, because they don't, militarily, a guerrilla organisation very rarely wins against a fully armed nation state. But every section, I'm getting around to it, sorry.
I didn't say anything.
Shut up. The fact that you're fighting against someone who will negotiate sows dissent in the ranks of the enemy. They will sit in their foxholes, they will sit in their apartments, they will sit in their pubs if we're fighting against an enemy that has pubs. And they will say, I don't want to know, I've been doing this since I was 15 and now I'm 40. What's happened? My friends are dead, one of my children is dead, and everyone else I know is in prison. Why don't we just pack it in and negotiate? With an enemy, if we were to establish the position of not negotiating, they will more than gladly fight and kill as many as possible rather than sit there.
Thank you, Mr. Crosby. And look at the time. One final point abstaining on the motion. I shall give it to our treasurer, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to highlight a quote that William Shakespeare used that really relates to this. It's
that something is wrong with the state of Denmark, and I get bingo.
Yes!
But no,
Is that what that was about?
I've got a serious point as well. So I think both sides have kind of failed to address the point of a coup. I think both sides kind of correlated, our rise in the state with terrorism, where that's not always the case. I think some speakers mentioned, Nazi Germany and how an uprising there would be a terrorist attack. It wouldn't. It would be a coup. I think maybe both sides probably give a definition that's more accurate. Would be best for the.
Okay, opposition to respond first this time. Please do try to keep it reasonably quick and concise. Take it.
The definition of terrorism? Oh, no. I think to separate them both. To be able to separate. To be able to separate between a coup and terrorist attack, and if we have a definition that suffices both sides.
Anyone care to take that from the opposition? Is that a yes, Mr. Dobbin?
It's a tentative yes.
On your feet then, please. No. The quicker you answer, the quicker we get to go to the pub. So.
Yeah.
Alternatively, you can decline to respond. Does your side decline to respond?
No, because that looks bad. You'd think less of me if I declined, so.
I could never think that too. I feel like half the house got that and half the house didn't. I'm very confused. Right?
We all got it.
On your feet, Alan.
To draw a line between terrorists and those causing a coup is again one entirely defined by context. It's who's supporting this coup, where is the source of this coup? Does this coup from a source within the state, it's other generals, as was the case in, I believe, Turkey. It's other people who were, again, I'm not entirely sure in the situation, but it's that then it becomes very difficult to define because a coup, as it stands, could very well be carried out by terrorists and was clearly defined by Conor. It's in that situation, one is a terrorist up until the point that they have assumed the role of the state, and that does not retroactively change their actions from having been that of a terrorist. So, in summary, maybe those committing a coup are terrorists, maybe they aren't because it's a difficult context thing.
Thank you, Mr. Dobbin. And finally, Mr. Crosby.
We would say the difference between a coup d'etat and a terrorist is that you can't keep chickens in a terrorist. Yeah, sorry. That lets joke care of the British Vintage Joke Foundation. Online from the Bodleian Library. But nevertheless, yeah, we acknowledge that there is a great deal of blurring between those two groups. And we feel that it would be disingenuous to say, oh, we will negotiate with cooing factions of the state, but we will not negotiate with terrorists. Because, however you frame it, you could well be sitting down with a cooing faction, but suddenly, out in the street, the government forces push them back, drive them into the sea, and suddenly, oh, you're sitting down and negotiating with terrorists. That's a big no-no. You know what I mean? We feel that in the lack of an adequate and universally accepted definition of terrorism, we can't really distinguish between the two, so we should be able to negotiate with both. Frankly.
Thank you, Mr. Crosby, and thank you very much to the speakers for those wonderful answers and to the members of the floor for those wonderful questions. The final things to on the agenda are quickly closing remarks from the guest chair and then a vote. So just before that, Mr. O'Neill, do we know where we are sojourning to?
Yes, woodworkers.
Woodworkers, okay, so standard practice. I want to set off the woodworkers immediately once we're finished.
May I also just, with regard to the pub crawl, if any of you wish to go on Monday, please, it would be ideal if we could get numbers for tonight. So if you have £5 in your pocket or £7, I'll be signing up afterwards in the pub. And also, if you're friends, you can also come on Monday and sign up then. I'll have a sheet and stuff and we'll stamp. So yeah, please, all come and pay if you can.
The more the merrier, and all that. So yes, as per usual, Mr. O'Neill will be waiting outside to take a delegation at the beginning, and then I and a few other council members will be here at the end to take the last stragglers. So, I do now invite our guest chair for this evening to give his closing remarks.
Thank you very much. I'll not keep you more than a minute because it's late. Well, I just like to say again, thank you for inviting me along. I felt the energy in the room, and it's good to feel young energy. Young people, it's a very good thing. Also, what struck me was that I didn't feel, it was a very interesting bit, and I thought that maybe somebody would have logged an amendment to it. Maybe that's not within the Rook's.
No comment.
But it struck me that it was a very fair debate, very intelligent debate. It struck me also that I didn't feel any there was any bitterness welling up within the room. I didn't see or hear flags being run up flagpoles as you often do.
You should have brought the European flag.
Oh, right. I should have brought a dog, it's okay. I'd say that decades ago I attended a students' event, a bit like this, but it was over the middle of the hall. But things have changed since then. I think John Robb, a Balmain surgeon, who don't find him around a bit quite a liberal guy, but anyway, he was speaking. On one side of the hall sat Catholic students, on the other side of the hall sat Protestant students. That's what it was. And this was the cream of Northern Ireland society, the intellectuals. So we've come a long way. We're here in this moment, and we should savor this moment. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grant, for those wonderful words. I do now hereby move this House to a vote. As I said last week, we will now be checking membership cards. So if you have your membership cards, please get them out and raise them high. Otherwise, if you've forgotten to bring yours this week, I apologise, but we have to get you to start bringing them somehow. So, yes, please, membership cards at the ready.
I don't have one, so just go ahead and bring it.
I have no spares.
Here, what? Here we go.
All right then. Order, come on. We're very, very nearly there. So, this is about on-speaker ability. It is not who convinced the most, but who you think spoke the best this evening. So if you believe that this side, the proposition, spoke best this evening, please raise your hand and say aye! Keep them up, keep them up.
Membership card. We've got a rogue membership card. Point of order, Mr. President, we've got a rogue membership card.
That's right. We didn't. Mr. Dillon, I did not I'd just like to point out that those of you who are holding up your hands without cards with them, I can see, I do have eyes, I know that you're not holding up cards. Could all those who believe that the opposition spoke better this evening, please raise your hand and say nay?
Nay.
Keep them up, keep them up. 1, 3, 5.
Never.
And we. And 4. Finally, all those who believe each side spoke equally well, equally terribly, or wish to express no opinion on the matter whatsoever, please raise your hand and say loud, say proud, say meh! Meh! Keep them up, keep them up. I count 11. Oh yeah, we've got a membership card.
Lily's an HLM.
Yes, so, Mr. Guest Chair, would you like to read back the vote to me, please?
Yeah, the vote was for the proposition 21 for, opposition 4, and abstentions 11.
There we have it, the proposition is victorious!